how do these gases actually leave one tissue to one compartment to go to the next compartment? I did change these slides a little bit from what I posted. I'll repost it when we're done with the set, but basically I simplified it a little bit. So let's go over structure of smooth muscle, kind of how it works, basically unusual, structure and function. And then how do you regulate it? I did take out a little bit of this. It was a repeated. Once you get to the GI tract, we're going to go over that, so to save time, we'll just go over the GI tract. Okay, smooth muscle. This one, by the way, is more different than the other two. This part, there are a lot of similarities. Right? Your striations, the arrangement of your actin-amide, the whole troponin and tropomyosin was all the same. Positive. The smooth muscles, here they are. Guess why they're called? Well, let's go back. Why were these called striated? So stripes, right? Because of the arrangement of the sarcomeres. They just repeat. So they have a striated appearance. Smooth muscle, guess why it's called smooth? You don't have it. And if you look at them, they look smooth. So you can see them here, and notice there is some nerves coming in. Remember in cardiac muscle you saw no nerve. Here, there's varicosities along a neuron. One thing to point out, smooth muscle can be complicated. We're going to keep it simple for the class. But compared to the others, it can be kind of messy. And you have smooth muscle everywhere. Alright, so smooth muscle, right? This is all involuntary. It's basically, cardiac's involuntary too. So aside from cardiac, every muscle that you have is involuntary. And this is a lot. Remember in cardiac muscle you get a lot of gap junctions? In smooth muscle, you do have gap junctions. And here's the key, they'll always be this way for smooth muscle, almost always. Two varying degrees. Some smooth muscles have a lot of gap junctions, some smooth muscles don't have many gap junctions. Actin and myosin filaments, you'll be happy to know you still have them. You still have a cross bridge and they still slide past each other. They are just not arranged in circles. That's why it looks smooth. What does it do? Contraction in your GI tract. You don't think about that, right? Respiratory tract. Reproductive tracts, kidneys, bladders, ciliary.